their jurisdiction, when they use this very case as their rationale for moving forward with this. In this matter, the federal court, the Supreme Court, decided to take a state's right and turn it into something under the federal authority. Because this isn't about commerce between states. This isn't about recognition of citizenship, which is what the 14th Amendment is about. This is about the government, first and foremost, overstepping its bounds initially and becoming involved in marriage in the first place. But there was never, ever any place in federal law for it to have jurisdiction. They've invalidated the Defense of Marriage Act, and they have taken one of the fundamental building blocks of society, the union between a man and a woman to create a family, and they have tossed it by the wayside. They have ignored the fact that even people who normally side with them, people who are normally on the leftist side of things, have stated point blank that this is damaging to children. According to the American College of Pediatricians, they claim that the same-sex marriage ruling is, quote, a tragic day for America's children. In a statement that was released Friday, the president of the American College of Pediatricians said that the Supreme Court's decision to legalize same-sex marriage will have a significant negative impact on children in the United States. Dr. Sotella, who is the president of the college, said that this is a tragic day for America's children. The Supreme Court of the United States has just undermined the single greatest pro-child institution in the history of mankind, the natural family. Just as it did in the joint Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton decisions, the Supreme Court has elevated and enshrined the wants of adults over the needs of children. Now, the college, which has members in 44 states and in several countries outside of the United States, they had joined in this case as a violent complainant. In this case, of course, it's led it to legalization of same-sex marriage in all 50 states automatically, supposedly. And in the brief that they filed, it stated what is often the case when it's... let me rephrase, because I'm getting tongue-tied. In the brief they filed, it stated what is often the case when sound research is ignored by the left when it fails to support their causes. Quote, despite being certified by almost all major social science scholarly associations, indeed, in part because of this, the alleged scientific consensus that having two parents of the same sex is not as good for a child's well-being is almost wholly without basis. All but a handful of the studies cited in support draw on small, non-random samples which cannot be demonstrated and large to the same-sex population at large. This limitation is repeatedly acknowledged in scientific meetings and journals, but ignored when asserted as settled findings in public or judicial advocacy. The bottom line is in the brief that they filed, it says, look, it's BS that any research shows that a same-sex couple is as good for a kid as a heterosexual couple as far as learning, heaven help us, gender roles and understanding how society works. The college itself has maintained that a significant body of research has demonstrated that same-sex marriage deliberately deprives the child of a mother or a father and is therefore harmful. But as is often the case with the left, let's ignore that because that's not on our side. We don't agree with that. It doesn't help our agenda. So we ignore it and we say that you're wrong. You're wrong. We're right. We know better. We're smarter than you. We're the progressives. What you say and think doesn't matter. Only what we say and think matters. So that's where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. And again, you've heard me say it before. I'm not against same-sex marriage being recognized by states. I am against the federal government behaving in a way that's not consistent with the Constitution. This is a states' rights issue simply because, first and foremost, there is no constitutional right to marriage, period. So under the 14th Amendment and equal protection under the law, these same-sex couples are afforded the same protections and they're afforded the same reality on a state-by-state basis that the rest of us are. That constitutes a consistency of equal protection under the law. The 14th Amendment was being applied fairly and evenly. There was no 14th Amendment conflict in a state-by-state decision on whether or not to recognize same-sex marriages. Period. Now, there's a couple of ways that the conservatives, and in particular the religious, the people of faith, can fight back with this if they so choose. Now, some of these are doing so based on deep-held principles. I agree. A homosexual lifestyle is something that is not congruent with my teachings as a Christian. But I do firmly believe that it is my place to love the sinner while I hate the sin. And I also firmly believe that our Constitution tells us that this becomes a state issue because it is not specifically told anywhere in the Constitution that the federal government has an authority or a right to oversee this. So then, on a state-by-state basis, if they're going to recognize this civil union, then it should be up to that state, and therefore the people living in that state. And I would contend that this is actually a setback for those who are looking for acceptance. You are already up to 37, 38 states that had begun recognizing same-sex marriage, began issuing marriage licenses for same-sex couples. You're past the halfway point at that point. You're winning that argument. You're winning the culture over by jump-starting this and forcing the rest of the states to just fall in line like what's going to be expected. I say expected. It's certainly not guaranteed, and I'd say this fight is really just about to heat up. You're only going to cause resentment and make it take that much longer before those who are opposed to homosexuals on general principle begin to see the error of their ways. Because people are people. And we have way more in common than we have difference. And it's not the first time you heard me say that. I do not bode ill will towards same-sex couples. And I am not against same-sex marriage. For the reasons I've said already. Because it's not really marriage. So I found a way to make peace with my religious conviction and the fact that our government doesn't operate in the same fashion as our church does. But there's a couple of ways to fight back. I said that already. Now I'm going to tell you what they are. Number one, those who ordinarily officiate over weddings can just stop officiating weddings altogether. You cannot be forced to do something for a same-sex couple that you're not doing for a heterosexual couple. If you've just stopped doing it altogether, government can't make you. Or at least they can't yet. Watch for them to try and change that. So, a state can stop issuing marriage licenses altogether. It'd be really nice, actually, if the government just got completely out of it. That would be awesome. No more marriage licenses, period. Now, the other way, of course, is just for everybody to stand up and say no. If this is about your religious conviction, then every church parishioner in this country needs to be prepared to lose their tax-exempt status, because that will come. Now, it's not in this finding, and I've even heard people say it's not going to affect people of conscience. Dare I remind you that it took legal action in federal court before Obamacare said, let me rephrase, let me start this again, because I've got a little ahead of myself. Obamacare said that your religious conviction doesn't matter. Hello, if you're a Catholic institution, you still have to pay for contraception. Under the Obamacare guidelines, that was still a requirement. It took legal action. It took the courts to say, no, you can't do this. But is the court going to maintain consistency on this? I would like to think that the court would say, all right, well, if you're not performing this religious ceremony, then it's based on your religious viewpoint and it seems to be genuine and sincere, then okay. But the problem is you're going to have to take it to federal court in the first place. These people aren't going to be suing in federal court to begin with, I don't imagine. Typically, that's not how these things work. Just ask the bakers and the pizza makers and the photographers and the videographers. All these people who have been forced, despite their religious conscience, to participate in a same-sex wedding or lose their livelihood. They will tell you real quick that these people, they don't start at the federal level, but they're willing to take it that far if that's what it takes to get what they want. The wants of adults are way more important than the well-being of children, after all. Otherwise, how could you ever condone abortion in the first place? Well, I just don't want to have a kid. Did you think about that before you got pregnant? Well, you know, I didn't really have to think about it much until then. But at the very least, in Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court, in the opinion, said, bottom line, if Congress would develop some intestinal fortitude and actually write into law definition of when life begins, well, that would end the discussion. At that point in time, they used the fact that they're supposed to follow the letter of the law as an excuse to find on the side of personal privacy, which is the basis of Roe v. Wade.